Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Self Development with Tactics podcast. And I'm your host, Christopher, and I'm a 17-year-old graphic design student from Austria. And because I always forget to mention this. And I'm very, very happy to see you again and to talk to you again. And now my laptop starts using his air conditioning again, which you can hear in the recording and which fucks me a little bit. But as you can see, we are going ahead with the same thing as the last episode. So the summary of the Decisive book by Chip and Dan Heath or Heath or whatever they are called. And so because we made the first part in the last episode, we are now going to talk about Chapter 2, Avoiding a Narrow Frame. And unfortunately, I've just, talked about the first paragraph here in the last episode, but I will do it again so that it's some kind of complete. And so I'll start reading. When Fischhoff began to categorize teenagers' decisions, he found that the most common type was one that lacked any choice at all. It was what he called a statement of resolve. An example would be, I'm going to stop blaming others. And so, as you can see by this statement, there are no actually choices. Maybe there are in terms of whether you're doing this or whether you're not doing this. And before I forget to mention, this book is all about making choices and, some insights and tips into how to make better choices and maybe choices that make you more happy. And a 1993 study by Paul Nutt, which analyzed 168 decisions found of the team, he studied only 29% considered more than one alternative, which tells me that you should have more than one alternative, and it's best to have multiple alternatives to choose from. Nutt found that whether or not decisions failed 52% of the time over the long term versus only 32% of the decisions with two or more alternatives. Which is, the chance of getting it right is much higher if you have more decisions it's much higher if you have more decisions than if you have less decisions, which totally makes sense for me. Why do whether or not decisions fail more often? Nutt argues that when a manager pursues a single option, she spends most of her time asking, how can I make this work? How can I get my colleagues behind me? Meanwhile, other vital questions get neglected. Is there a better way? What else could we do? To escape narrow frames, be aware of whether or not decisions. Opportunity cost is a term from economics that refers to what we give up when we make a decision. For instance, if you and your spouse spend $40 on a Mexican dinner on Friday night and then go to the movies, which will cost $20, your opportunity costs might be $60. Sushi dinner plus some television at home. Your opportunity cost might be a $60 sushi dinner plus some television at home. The sushi and TV combo is the next best thing you could have done with the same amount of time and money. Adding alternatives improves decision making, but you won't brainstorm additional alternatives if you aren't aware of your neglecting them. Focusing is great for analyzing alternatives, but terrible for spotting them. Our lack of attention to opportunity costs is so common that it can be shocking when someone acknowledges them. A good quality question is to ask is, what am I giving up by making this choice? Another technique you can use to break, and so I have to stop there. A good question is, what am I giving up by making this choice? This is a very good question at my point of view, because as I was going through this or reading over it, I was just thinking about how I could have used this kind of question in my life before, and I was thinking about, um, I'm deciding between two things, or let's say three things, and then I'm asking myself, what am I giving up by choosing either of them? And then I come to the point, or will come to the point, where I can see what all these options give me, and if my priorities, for example, are, I don't know, not spending so much of money, I would just take this option that costs less, or the least amount of money, and by the other things I would give up a lot of money, because this one question I should take is much cheaper than the other ones. So what I want to say in a quick one is that by asking what am I giving up by making this choice, you can really see what fits your preferences the best. If that wasn't clear enough to you before that, but I've pointed it out anyways. A good quality question, I'm sorry. Another technique you can use to break out of a narrow frame is to run the vanishing option tests. This involves asking yourself, you cannot choose any of the current options you're considering. What else could you do? That phrase, whether or not, is a classic warning signal that you haven't explored all your options. When people... I think it's not just a complete summary that's connected with each paragraph. So the paragraphs aren't connected with each other. And so it might be a little bit, crazy sounding if I'm going through this. So the phrase, whether or not, is a classic warning signal that you haven't explored all your options. When people imagine that they cannot have an option, they are forced to move their mental spotlight elsewhere, really move it, often for the first time in a long while. Until we are forced to dig up a new option, we are likely to stay fixated on the ones we already have. That's completely true, because we all are, lazy as fuck. It doesn't matter how energized you might think about yourself, you might think you are. In the end, we just all are some kind of lazy. Removing options can do people a favor, because it makes them notice that they're stuck on one small patch of a wide landscape. I'm very, very bad at taking decisions, because I always dig up such a lot of options for me and alternatives, so that at the end there are so much good options and I do not know what to take. And then it's really great to, for me, someone that takes a lot of options by telling me, these are shit, this is also shit, oh yeah, this one is as well shit. It's much better for me, because then there are only maybe 2 or 3 to decide of, which makes everything a lot easier. When you hear the telltale signs of a narrow frame, people wondering whether or not they should make a certain decision, or rehashing arguments endlessly about the same limit set of choices, push them to widen their options. Which means, for example, someone is like, either I'm going into this shop and buy something, or I will not. And then you could be like, oh yeah, but you could also go to this shop or that shop, or buy something online, or on eBay, on Amazon, on other platforms. I don't know. And I haven't thought about that, whether or not, or I didn't thought that whether or not questions are so complicated and, bad for people, because they seem pretty clear, aren't they? Or don't they? Because, you have 2 options. Either you do this or you don't do this. But maybe there is, in terms of business, it's just, I just understand what he is saying. For example, you have an ad budget of, don't know, $1,000, and you have the choice between using all of your money for something or you will not. So you have a Facebook ad and you spend your $1,000 on this Facebook ad. And then I come up to you and say, but you could just spend $250 on this Facebook ad, and then, I don't know, 500 on Twitter, and the rest, I don't know, I can't do math, the rest on Instagram advertising. I just some kind of get it. It's, to be honest, very hard to read through it really clearly and so on, so that you can actually understand it, and especially the podcast listeners, and be mentally on the text, so actually reading it. But let's see what chapter 3, multi-track, can give us and can give me. Multitracking involves considering several options simultaneously. Multitracking has another advantage too, one that is more unexpected. It feels better. Multitracking keeps egos in check. One rule of thumb when interviewing job candidates is to keep searching for options until you fall in love at least twice. I don't actually get that, to be honest. Some kind of there is research suggesting that extreme multitracking is detrimental. Adding one more alternative to your decision will substantially improve your decisions, and it stops well short of triggering decisions paralysis. I think, or for me, having more decisions is actually some kind of bad, because I'm used to having such a lot of decisions to make or options for one decision to have, which, every option and or decision added to this amount will make everything much better than it was, as I just was telling you right before. But let's see. Decision paralysis is not a big factor in most circumstances. You don't need a plethora of choices to improve your decisions. You just need one extra choice or two. To get the benefits of multitracking, we need to produce options that are meaningfully distinct. To diagnose whether your colleagues have created real or shame options, poll them for their preferences. Generating distinct options is even more difficult when your minds settle into certain well-worn grooves, which is something they pointed out at the top of this article, that we a lot of times just make decisions that contribute our thinking we have, and our lifestyle we have, and all these things we are used to and we already do. And so, as I was thinking about it the last episode, it is something very, very bad, because you just are in this rat race and will be forever in this rat race, because you just make the same decisions and choices over and over and over again, which there is no way to get out of it. But I'll hope, and that's my hope for this article, to show me a way not to do this, and not to make decisions that I'm used to and I should do or do because of my behavior, what I have now. Where did I stop? Grooves are triggered when you think about avoiding bad things, and one is triggered when we think about pursuing good things. When we are in one state, we tend to ignore the other. Psychologists have identified two contrasting mindsets that affect our motivation, our receptiveness to new opportunities. A prevention focus, which orients us toward avoiding negative outcomes, and a promotion focus, which orients us toward pursuing positive outcomes. The wizard's decisions may combine the caution of the prevention mindset with the enthusiasm of the promotion mindset. Push for this and that rather than this or that. This and that. it's kind of the same what I was talking about with the ad example. You could do the Facebook ad and the other ad. You will not do both fully and some kind of half-assed, but you do both, and so you have both, and so you do not have to make a decision, some kind of. Chapter 4, find someone who's solved your problem. Ask yourself who else is struggling with a similar problem and what can I learn from them. To break out of a narrow frame, we need options, and one of the most basic ways to generate new options is to find someone else who's solved our problem. I think in terms of not really solved our problem, but they had the same problem as you have or I have, and they have solved it. Bright spots are native to our situation. It's your own success you're seeking to reproduce. Note, for more on bright spots, read Switch. A playlist comprises question to ask. A playlist comprises a question to ask, principles to consult, and ideas to consider. For example, if you're planning a marketing campaign, you might ask what kind of iconography within the brand is usually or useful, and what could we build around it. Is there a key color for the brand? What is the enemy of this product? What would the brand be like if it was the market share leader? What if I was an upstart? Can you personify the product? Playlists spur us to multitrack. And I'll have to read this paragraph with the playlist again because I didn't really get it and I thought it wasn't that important. But it seems to be. A playlist comprises questions to ask, principles to consult, and ideas to consider. Okay, I think I get it. When you use analogies, when you find someone who has solved your problem, you can take your pick from the world's buffet of solutions. Or is it Buffett? It's just like Warren Buffett, which is a little funny. But when you don't bother to look, you've got to cook up the answer yourself. Or when you're stuck, you can use a process of laddering up to get inspiration. The lower rungs on the ladder offer a view of situations very similar to yours. Any visible solutions will offer high probability of success since the conditions are so similar. As you scale the ladder, you'll see more and more options from other domains, but those options will require leaps of imagination. Which is just kind of the same as I was talking about me not liking having a lot of decisions or options of or in decisions to have, because there's so much to overthink. And as I said, it's only then overthinking and not like really thinking and, but then I think you should really be focusing on your preferences. And if all these things you're considering are really contributing your preferences, and if some not, just throw them out of your game. And maybe you should only be thinking about these things that actually contribute to your preferences. Chapter 5, consider the opposite. And to make good decisions, CEOs need the courage to seek out disagreement. One meta-study found that the confirmation bias was stronger in emotion-laden domains. Don't know. Such as religion or politics, and also when people had a strong underlying motive to believe one way or the other. Confirmation bias increases when people have previously invested a lot of time or effort in a given issue. It reminds me on me, I was very deeply in, fitness and, eating right and so on. And I'm still eating right as I think I'm eating right. And I often talk to people and they are like, it's actually not that good what you're eating. And I'm like, fuck you. I don't care. I'm doing this. And I always make the decision to do what I think is good for me because I've put a lot of time and effort into figuring out what works for me. And this first step is to reality testing the assumptions you're making, is to develop the discipline to consider the opposite of your initial instincts. The discipline begins with a willingness to spark constructive disagreement. And I'll read that again. The first step is to reality testing the assumptions you're making, is to develop the discipline to consider the opposite of your initial instincts. We want to avoid the momentary discomfort of being cancelled or challenged, but it's preferable to the pain of walking blindly into a bad decision. I don't know if I read it correctly, but I'm always in long-term decisions. I'm eating healthy food now because I don't want to be fucked up in 7 years or 60 years or somewhat. I'm doing sports because I don't want to be an old crippled man in some day. I just want to be energized all the time. And, you might see that a lot of decisions you're making are just for the long term. And there's, in terms of healthy eating, there are actually some benefits you get immediately. But often it's just the long term, and it's, not really satisfying for most. So the momentary discomfort, avoid momentary discomfort. For me, we all will do this, but sometimes it's just for the long term. When considering options, ask yourself what would have to be true for this option to be the right answer. What if your least favorite option were actually the best one? What data might convince us of that? And what if your least favorite option were actually the best one? Is one of the things I think is a very tough question, because you wouldn't really, if it's the best option, it doesn't matter, you won't take it because it's just us. And that's also something they have pointed out, which is the confirmation bias. We only decide things or decide for things we think or we like, or we think we like, or we think they contribute our lifestyle and how we live, and just us, so easily said. And it's really a rat race then, unfortunately enough. So what would have to be true for this option to be the right answer? What have to be true for this option to be the right answer? So what would your reality be like, or what would your life to be like to let this answer be the right one? What if your least favorite option is, I've just explained or talked about it, what data might convince us of that? Just Googling, why should I buy this bed? Because the ratings are good, because the wood is good they used, and so on. Sometimes I'm just making practical comparisons, because I think you can really memorize it way better if you have a real life comparison to this, or a real life comparison. I can't think of another word, but you have some kind of you are some kind of related to this statement, to this phrase, to these words. Sometimes we think we are gathering information when we are actually fishing for support. How do you know whether to ask prompting questions or open-ended ones? A good rule of thumb is to ask yourself, what's the most likely way I could fail to get the right information in this situation? That's actually true. So what's the most likely way I could fail to get the right information in this episode? If you want more money or a higher wage, what is then the best way to not get it is maybe to be just fucking unpolite or arrogant, or just thinking about yourself when you're talking to your boss, not like, I really want to contribute your business more. Could you please give me a higher wage so that I'm, more motivated, or I can put more energy into it? Maybe this would be a good option to make it right, or to not fail. Confirmation bias doesn't just affect what information people go looking for, it even affects what they notice in the first place. Our relationships at work are sometimes corrupted by negative assumptions that snowball over time. To avoid negativity with coworkers, some organization leaders urge their employees to assume positive intent. That is, to imagine that the behavior of words of your colleagues are motivated by good intentions even when their actions seem objectionable at first glance. And I think with this paragraph, this episode's end. And if you have any kind of questions, there are all the social media links down in the description if you're on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, in the podcast description, everything should be there. And so if you have any questions or anything to tell me, or anything, if there's anything, just write me a DM or comment on a post, or write me a comment here on YouTube, whatever you would like, for you the best, or what you prefer the most. But for that, I really thank you for watching or listening, whatever, and I'll actually see you the next time. And I hope you have a very, 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 very good day. And I'll see you the next time. Again.